Cumberland Public Schools Renovation Building Committee meeting of Monday, October 19th, 2020 to order at 6:05 p.m. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So the first order of business, so the next order of business is the approval of the previous minutes, and that would have been the September 15th, 2020 meeting. Are there any comments, questions, pleasure of the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mitchell.
Just very quickly, I don't know if you're aware of this, Mr. Chairman, but Deb Malcolm, we thought it would be appropriate to have Deb Malcolm, the principal of Cumberland Hill Elementary School, take Nydia Carbonic's place on the building committee, since Cumberland Hill is going to be the first school that is worked on after the trans building. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention,
Okay.
Mayor.
I appreciate that, Mr. Superintendent. And yes, and I see that Ms. Malcolm is on the call. Okay. So we'll check out that. Anybody else? Pleasure of the committee.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Mr. Fiorillo moves to approve the minutes. We have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mitchell. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those against? All right, so that's going to pass by my calculations, 9 to 0. Let the record reflect. I believe Mr. Damana is not here, nor is Mr. Anderson. Am I correct?
That's correct. I know that Mr. Damana was hoping to join us, but I know he has a family conflict.
Okay, so for right now, that passes 9 to 0 with Mr. Damana and Mr. Anderson absent, and Ms. Malcolm taking the place of Ms. Carbonic for this portion of whenever Cumberland Hill is part of the discussion. All right. So next, current projects, design review, transitional building, swing space. Who am I turning this over to? Who's up?
I would imagine it's either Mr. Torado or Ms. Mers.
Yes, I believe Lewis was having a technical difficulty.
Yeah, he's got to try calling back in.
Okay. So everyone had an opportunity to see the schematic plans for the transitional building. So Torado's group will go through us, there's some floor plans and we can discuss it as we go.
Lewis is coming back in now.
Oh, I can hear you. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, Lewis, I just did the intro. It's all yours.
Okay. So I think we were going to start with the high school project and go on to Cumberland Hill. And so I think Robert or Mike is going to start by putting up some drawings. And what I wanted to say in general, I think that all of you have the package of the schematic design that went out. In general, we're going to go through very few plans. I know that there's an emphasis and focus on the mechanical system, so we're going to try to address those initially. Okay, so this is the floor plans of the transitional building. For the most part, all of our schematic designs that were included in the stage 2 application are basically the same. There have been some revisions to the main administration area at the transitional building that will be used for the school administration for the swing space. What the change was that we added a bulletproof reception window, which is exactly the same as we're going to have in every other school. So for consistency and having the same security protocols, that was added. The main shift that I'm gonna disconnect that, excuse me. Sorry about that. That was gonna bother us. Okay, the main thing that changed in this transitional building project was the mechanical systems that were scheduled to be done for the second phase were shifted to this first phase. And that involves the replacement of the unit ventilators at the circular part of the building, and also some new rooftop equipment for the administration areas, which are located at the other part of the building. Mike, if we could go on to the next one. The other major change that occurred was that the existing unit ventilators at the original high school needed to be refurbished or replaced. So our current drawings show them to be replaced. So not only are we doing all of the perimeter classrooms that needed those unit ventilator replaces, but there's also some interior classroom spaces that require a rooftop unit approach with that distribution system. And so this is what this drawing shows, the areas of the original high school that is going to get new unit ventilators.
Louis, this is Rick Bolio. Since you're talking about the ventilation system, I'm sure you saw my email. Just wondering what our situation is. We had some discussion about it at the last meeting, and I tried to figure stuff out based on these drawings. In many cases, it just said, replace existing. So I don't know what the existing is.
Yeah.
Could you walk through a little bit, what's currently spec'd and whether or not things have been reassessed based on any guidance that we may have received from Rhode Island on doing these types of upgrades while we're doing them?
Yes. So at the beginning of stage 3 schematic design process, when it first started, our engineer EDS, Will Meyer, brought up the issue of re-examining, revisiting, reinvestigating what had been included in the stage 2 project with the new focus on the COVID-19 approach. So we have been working on that, and I'm just going to turn it over to him, and he will be able to address the mechanical systems. So Will, if you could please address that.
Sure. So to answer the first question, what are existing systems? In general, throughout most of the buildings, and in general in these two buildings that we're working on right now, the most prevalent system, especially in the classrooms, utilizes classroom unit ventilators. Those are basically fan coil units located at the perimeter with a fresh air louver through the exterior wall that allows you to bring in fresh air for the space. It has a hot water heating coil typically, and it has dampers that can vary the amount of outside air and return air to maintain proper ventilation in the space. Each space is also provided with individual temperature control because it has its own unit. The fresh air that's brought in through the unit ventilators is exhausted through rooftop exhaust fans. So that's kind of a brief description of what the existing systems are. And that kind of correlates to the unit ventilator equipment replacement row in the HVA system matrix that's up on the screen. You know, we did look at some other options. You know, we brought up the energy recovery ventilator option because that provides us with a system without recirculation of air. Recirculation of air is not an ideal situation if we're trying to prevent transmission of infectious aerosols. And then we also took a look at displacement ventilation, which in addition to not having any recirculation of room air, it also has optimal ventilation effectiveness, basically meaning that the air is introduced low in the room. It rises up due to the stack effect created by each person within the room, their heating effect, and then it's exhausted at the ceiling so that you have a pass and you're not blowing contaminants back down onto the occupants. So those are the three different options that we had talked about for the various areas in question here.
So the displacement ventilation, basically, you're bringing in fresh air and exhausting it completely. And based on the sizing of the system, that can happen, you know, one or many times per minute, per hour, what have you. Correct?
Right. Yeah, it's certainly going to meet the minimum requirements of you know, of ASHRAE and CDC and all that. Usually it's in excess of that. The good thing about school ventilation, because of the fact that it's fairly densely occupied, is that when you're meeting the code requirements for ventilation, you're meeting all of these ASHRAE guidelines that are in place.
And when you say ASHRAE guidelines, are those the effectively the documents that I had sent to the group, or are you referring to some other ASHRAE guidelines that aren't COVID modified?
Actually, in terms of ventilation, ASHRAE hasn't really modified the ventilation requirements. You know, they've talked about different strategies for incorporating disinfection. They've talked about improving filtration effectiveness by going with a higher MERV rating. Talked about some modifications to how the equipment is controlled to provide pre-purge and post-purge opportunities with the controls. But the code requirement for fresh air is still, you know, what they're going with in terms of recommendations for air changes. You know, they have made some recommendations to try and increase outside air by opening windows and things like that when it's temperate. But obviously we have to be careful about increasing outside air levels, especially with existing systems, but also with any system, just to make sure that we're not overpowering the cooling or the heating element so that we don't run into comfort and you know, humidity issues within the space.
Will, could you, because I know people have raised this question and it's a buzzword around, could you talk a little bit about the ultraviolet and bipolar ionization systems?
Yeah, those are basically two forms of disinfection that that have been recommended by ASHRAE and we've seen them going in quite a bit. We find that the bipolar ionization tends to be more effective just because it's actually sending the ions out into the space where they can do work, whereas the ultraviolet option only sees the air that goes past it. It has to be concealed, usually within the ductwork or within the unit. So, and there are some systems that combine both of them, which is, a win-win. But we've seen that the bipolar ionization is a little bit more prevalent, a little bit more effective in neutralizing not only infectious aerosols, but other indoor air contaminants.
And Will, I know the school department has been concerned about making sure that equity throughout the system happens. Can the two systems that you just talked about, can those be introduced to any mechanical system, regardless whether it's a unit ventilator or a ducted system or existing or new?
Right, I think that's a good point. There are certain of these COVID measures that can really be introduced with any system. What we've kind of highlighted in the system matrix are items that are not really retrofittable. For example, no recirculation of room air. You can't do that with a unit ventilator. You can't take a unit that's meant to recirculate air and turn it into 100% outside air unit. The other thing is ventilation effectiveness. You can't retrofit a system to have better ventilation effectiveness. It has to do with the infrastructure of the ductwork and the type of air delivery system you have. But filtration certainly can be retrofitted to any of these systems, going up to a MERV 13. Again, the MERV 13 isn't a requirement. It's a recommendation. These are guidelines. Basically, what they're trying to say, or what they do say, is increase your filtration effectiveness to the point where you're not adversely affecting the airflow of the system that you're dealing with. So certainly the unit ventilators can be retrofitted with MERV 13 filters. They can handle that. They're more robust than, say a smaller fan coil unit, so they can handle that. Any of these systems can handle the filtration, the UV and bipolar ionization, the disinfection modality can be retrofitted or can be installed into any of these type of systems. So there are certain items that are non-system dependent that can be, certain COVID considerations that you can implement without respect to the type of system. But then there are other, there are other things that are inherent to the systems that, that's where we need to make a decision on how important those things are to us so that we can move forward with the best system for everybody.
So one other item was just the humidification.
Yeah.
And unit ventilator, your top row of your matrix there, it doesn't seem to mention that at all. And
Right.
Just so I'm not assuming anything, does this allow for humidification of the room air?
Certainly, humidification can be retrofitted to any of these systems, whether it's whether it's inherent to the piece of equipment itself or installed within the room.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second there? So these unit ventilators, which are on the perimeters of the buildings, which are basically a wall-mounted unit that shares an outside and an inside with
Yeah.
each classroom, has its own thermostat on the wall.
Right.
These are being replaced with equivalent. Is that true?
It's a newer version of the same thing. It's not
Okay.
materially different other than everything is 100% working properly and the controls are centralized and more complex.
So without getting into more of a central air system, this is kind of a straightforward swap out, if you will. Are there better grades of this system where you have some of these other elements kind of, put in as options, for instance, of these systems?
If I could interject, Will. So that isn't 100% correct in that it's not a swap, it's not an equal replacement. So one of the issues that we run into with CHIPS and with the Department of Ed is the quality of the teaching space and the sound that is emitted in it. So historically, they have been very concerned and don't care for unit ventilators because they generate a lot of noise.
So that should be in the cons column here, that they're noisy.
Yeah, no, but please let me finish.
Sure.
But we've went through this in projects in Cumberland and really set the standards for the state, where we had acoustical engineer go out and test different units, apply it to the space. The result of that was that in order to comply with the CHIP sound requirements, you needed to get a bigger or regularly more powerful unit ventilator that only ran on low, so that it complied with the required air exchanges while running on low. And so that's the change that we're doing. It is the same system, but is a higher grade of unit ventilator.
Okay, so that higher grade that you currently have spec'd, can it be upgraded to include other options like the UV, like the bigger filters, the MERV 13 or 14 filters, and the humidification?
Like, yeah, as I was saying, you can, these are not options that are available through the manufacturer, but they can certainly be installed into these systems. There's really none of these pieces of equipment come standard with that sort of option from the manufacturer. It would all be field installed options, but you can certainly get those for this. As I was saying, these unit ventilators can certainly handle a MERV 13 filter. It's just, there's really no change required. It's got a 2-inch filter rack. The 2-inch filter rack will accept a MERV 13 filter. And, we would just look at the static pressure loss through that filter to make sure that we weren't losing too much airflow based on that. And you could certainly install individual small bipolar ionization or UV lights within these units to provide those disinfection measures.
Okay, all that sounds promising. I think there's a number of recommendations, and while the recommendations aren't the requirements, so I understand the difference between a recommendation and a requirement. There are definitely revised requirements from the state of Rhode Island that I got to see today, and they are pretty clear on what these systems should do if possible. And I'll just read the sentence here. LEAs may need to consider contracting with experts to assess and assist with buildings that have facility-wide HVA systems and on how best to maximize those units. HVA systems with a minimum of 4 to 6 air changes per hour based on square footage and volume of space no less than 15 cubic feet of ventilation air per minute, CFM per person, and minimum efficiency reporting value of 13, that's the MERV 13 you were mentioning, filters.
Yep.
And outside air would require no changes for use at standard classroom densities. So as a taxpayer in town that's concerned with how we're spending our money and with the need for providing a, well, let's call it a desirable space to be in for teachers, staff, and students, and obviously the parents of those students. If we met these standards, it sounds like per the recommendations, you wouldn't need to have reduced density classrooms or let's say distance learning or any of these things if these were in place. So my point in bringing all this up is that we have like a once in a generation opportunity here to get it right. You know, we've had a monkey wrench thrown in well after the start of the project here in order to make basically accommodations for this new thing called COVID. And I would put it into almost like the security, safety and security category. And maybe that provides us different opportunities for reimbursement. I don't know. But, you know, the recommendations are pretty straightforward and seem to be pretty universally recommended. I think they all came out of that Harvard study between Rhode Island and the other sources that I found, ASHRAE and other states, et cetera. One of the fundamental questions I had, which I couldn't answer on my own, is what are we planning for? So you've just described that as it relates to the high school building, and what really would be the increase cost-wise should we want to do maybe some of these modifications, which sound easier than what I was originally expecting. And I guess a question to kind of nip this in the bud a little bit right now is that, do we have to decide that tonight before the meeting on Thursday, where we're recommending that these plans as is get submitted to RIDE for you know, the schematic design phase approvals? If the answer is yes, then I think we are unfortunately behind the 8 ball, and I hope we're not there. But if the answer is no, we have time to evaluate these options. Maybe not to the nth degree, but at least as a sense of saying, hey, it's going to cost a little bit more, and a little bit times whatever the current value is the number we need to know. If we can have time to evaluate that and then bring it back to this committee to say, yes, this is something that would cost, you know, X, you know, a delta of this in this particular phase. And can we afford that? Is that really just kind of in the, we'll call it the 10% category, or is it something more significant? And if it's more significant, you know, obviously that'll cause for more discussion, but I think regardless of what the answer is, there's probably a way to solve that before finishing the project and saying, gee whiz, I wish we should have done something different. So I would ask the folks, you know, responsible for the timeline, I don't know if that's Collier's or what have you, but to basically comment, you know, do we need to understand this now, or can we put a to-do on the docket for next meeting to say, hey, we'll evaluate those upgrades we talked about and come back with a cost that we can discuss. Can
So if
anybody?
Yeah.
Could respond to that, and then I think Holly's going to talk a little about this too. But so Will, EDS has given us rough square foot cost for the 3 options that we've been investigating. So you see that at the right-hand side of the. However, those are only mechanical costs associated with the 2 last options. Anything beyond the unit ventilators. There's also other work that will need to be investigated, designed, and cost estimated. And that mainly has to do with putting this equipment on the roof, making sure that it can be supported or the roof needs to be reinforced, and then figure out schemes of getting that down through the different floor levels. So what we gave you is a rough comparison of the mechanical cost, but we would need to go through the process of really doing some preliminary designs to be able to come up with a cost estimate to do that. For example, we're going to move into Cumberland Hill in a minute, but Cumberland Hill is a mixture of systems where you have unit ventilators and existing rooftop equipment that's distributed through ductwork. All of that would need to be investigated. It is certainly not too late. We are not behind the 8 ball. This is the perfect time to address this. We know what we went into stage 2 schematic design with. We can assess that compared to the other systems and be able to incorporate those into the project to whatever extent the committee chooses at the design development phase. And I think, Holly, if you want to just, anything you may want to add in this matter.
Yes, when you were referring to the different costs, were you referring to adding the bipolar, the filtration and the humidification into these systems? Is that a price as well, like versus these 3 systems we're looking at on the screen? So I guess the question is, what Louis just was referring to is the 3 different systems.
Yes,
and
but,
then you go ahead.
But my discussions with Will have been that the same square foot cost for and from what I understand, the best system is the bipolar ionization.
Right.
That could be added to either one of these
Right.
3 at approximately the same cost. So that's an easy one to be able to apply regardless of which one ends up being. But I would think that if the committee wishes us to further investigate any of these, we will also, as part of that investigation, provide the design parameters for humidification and the bipolar.
Can I just speak to the humidification for a second? Just because, I think pretty much all of these items that we're talking about, filtration, outside air changes, control sequences, all of those things, I think we can really incorporate without any sort of major financial impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think the humidification is going to be the one that's a toughie, just because, these buildings were not designed for humidification. I'm sure they don't have proper thermal breaks. The windows, I don't know if we're planning on replacing windows. Vapor barriers are not in place. You could start to have real issues with condensation within these buildings if you start introducing humidification, which is really what you would have to do to get them up to 40%. These buildings in a normal wintertime setting are probably down around 15 or 20% relative humidity in the wintertime. So we can really do all these other things. I just think in these existing buildings, in order to make them ready for humidification would not be the large cost. It would be getting the building ready for humidification. I think that could be pretty substantial.
Is there an increase in humidity that could be achieved without going through these very expensive envelope upgrades to be able to accommodate that?
I think it would be pretty tough to, without doing a full, having an envelope consultant come in and do a full study of where the dew points are going to happen within these existing walls. I don't think adding humidity, and if you're down below 40%, you're down below 40%. I can't really quantify that. I can just say that the building is not designed for that, and you're going to start to have condensation and other issues within the building if you try and humidify. And I think that's the case for, any existing building that wasn't designed for that.
So if I could, just to illustrate this, because I know it's difficult in other than layman terms. So what happens is when you have high humidity inside the space and cold outside, it's kind of what happens during the summer when you have ice water in a glass. That when the air temperatures reaches its dew point, it will happen inside a wall, and then you will have condensation that happens inside the wall or outside
Happen
the
on
wall.
the windows, the window
Yeah.
frames.
And then we typically have vapor barriers on the warm side of walls to avoid the dew point and vapor migrating into the center of the wall space. That all would need to be investigated and figured out how that would be done. But it could be much more of a problem unless it's done correctly than the lack of humidity.
Okay, guys, if I could just kind of cut to the chase here. I appreciate those details and they're important. Obviously, we don't want you to chase the hardest thing as our first solution here. What I'm asking for is there seems to be a lot of flexibility with the through wall units that are currently planned. What's the cost delta to have better versions of those? And if they do everything besides humidity, well, that's probably pretty darn good for a better bang for our buck.
Right.
I guess I would like that assessment to go throughout without having to spend $50,000 on engineering to decide whether or not the roof can support, an extra 2 horsepower on the blower or something of that ilk. I think there's a way we can do this smart, decide which ones seem to make sense. And if there is re-engineering that's needed, then we can decide to make that investment and do it. It wouldn't be the first time we've pumped the brakes here to do a better job in town and make some better decisions based on new information. And that's all this is. I know it's not a perfect system here, but we're just trying to do what we can. So if we don't have to make that decision tonight and we're not jeopardizing the rest of the project by saying yes tonight and putting an asterisk next to the yes, I would like to see some of this additional work done in time so that we can discuss it at the next meeting or whatever the time frame makes sense, so that we can vote yay or nay on what makes sense in terms of additive costs, so that when it comes time to executing the detailed design, we're doing it with what choices have been consciously made here for this process. That's my request.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I just want to make sure that we clearly understand this. We are doing that exercise for these 2 projects. The cost delta that we're going to be identified is probably applicable throughout the district, but we're going to focus in on these 2 projects.
That makes sense. So just to talk about a couple other areas that I think are related, and I think it goes along with the design review that we're doing here. There's talks about windows. And of course, looking at all the plans, Louis, there's lots of skylights. And I know you can have fixed skylights and you can have skylights that open. And obviously, you'd have to be choosy which days things get opened and which days are not opened. But I'm just wondering if that's another low-cost add, that if windows aren't opening now, we can perhaps have windows that do open. And if skylights are not opening now, we could have skylights that do open and take advantage of just good air circulation when the weather permits. Can you comment on skylights and windows?
My comment is that this is basically applicable to Cumberland Hill, where you have existing corridors that have multiple number of skylights. And in the new learning commons that we're designing, we have large new skylights. Right now, they're not operable. We can take a look at what it would take to be able to convert them to operable skylights.
Great.
That would give you some natural displacement ventilation there, Louis. That would be pretty good.
Yeah, no question.
Louis, did you say that was in the new edition?
No, in the existing building at Cumberland Hill, the corridors have multiple skylights. I'm gonna guess maybe every 20 feet there's a skylight. In the renovated space that we're creating learning commons on, we provide 3 new skylights. But those we had a standard Calwell type skylights. We will look at making those operable to allow ventilation.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question about ventilation related areas? One of the other recommendations were just the nurses' stations
Exactly.
and/or bathrooms. Are there other details that you want to mention in terms of what's being done for those areas, if there is anything?
Yeah, well, the nurses' offices are required to have negative pressure. They want to have isolation capabilities. They want to have dedicated outside air systems so that they're not exchanging air with other areas. They talk about maybe even providing a standalone HEPA unit within the space to further clean the air. Those can be ordered with bipolar ionization or UV filters as well. Yeah, and I think those are the main. And there's talk of ante-rooms as well. So we'd have to look at architecturally to see where those nurses' rooms are located and whether or not ante-rooms can be included. I don't think Louis, you can probably describe better if there's any work planned to those nurses' rooms. I don't remember that there was any, but I think from an HVAC standpoint, it's important to incorporate these things.
In both of the projects, the swing space and Cumberland Hill, there is planned work to both of the nurses' station.
Okay.
In the transitional building, it's a new space. And in Cumberland Hill is a renovated, expanded space. And I think that what we're going to look at is RIDE has certain requirements for nursing clinics. One of them is a waiting area. So we're going to see if we can design in a way that the waiting area becomes the ante-room and it's enclosed.
Yeah, and again, guys, I'm not looking for you guys to swing to the fences and say that everything's doubled in cost. But if I'll call it a compliance system is being planned now, but we can have a better system that meets some of the new requirements with some modest cost adds, or at least to know what those cost adds would be. And if at the tail end of this, a ante-room, vestibule is part of that, then that can be a little a la carte item. But I think just to assess, what's currently planned, what's that cost us versus what could we do, and what is the increased costs.
Okay.
These are fairly small areas. I think it makes sense to bring them up to snuff.
Perfect. Okay, I guess to recap for everybody, it sounds like, this doesn't have to be decided tonight. We have time to get some additional details for next meeting, unless that's too short of a time frame. And then we can choose if these additional changes are worth doing while we do this $80 million project.
Excuse me. So I just want to understand, are you, as far as the stage 2, the schematic design approval to move forward, this doesn't have an impact on waiting. If it were approved this evening, because these changes would only be added in the DD, in the design development, which would be in the period of time, doing the due diligence now and then revisiting the cost in a month, even if the schematic design was approved to move forward tonight, it would make no difference. It's not going, the schematic design is the basic design, and you can, as a district, add whatever you want in the meantime. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this, like, are you asking that we postpone
No. Just
Okay,
to be
okay.
completely clear, that's not what I'm asking. I thank you for confirming that we don't need to decide that tonight. Decide that meaning whatever these upgrades may be. We
Right.
have time to collect more information, costs and whatnot. I guess to be completely transparent, some of the comments that I had in the last meeting, looking for more specifics, weren't really captured in the notes, and therefore I don't believe they were really captured as something that had to be done. And when the time comes for a vote, I'm going to ask that we include as part of the contingency on that vote to move this additional gathering of information in prep for the next phase to make sure that we complete that. And it's actually on our, it's been approved by the entire committee and it's on our to-do list officially, and we actually get that stuff done.
Perfect. Thank you.
So thank you for the clarification.
I have one quick question. As we look at this, would we also consider
Louis?
increased operating costs?
I didn't know there was a question. That makes sense to me. Everything, as I mentioned before, that we're considering, the committee is considering enhancing the mechanical systems can be done as the plans are developed. And we will capture the cost for those additions as part of the DD set.
Right. The capital-
And Louis, you'll be able to have estimates for that for the next meeting,
Yes, I just want to be clear. When is the next meeting?
a month, approximately a month from now. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Which means they'd have to be ready a week before that for review.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
It sounded like somebody else had a question there and I couldn't quite hear them.
I did this before, I don't know.
Yeah, who's speaking right now? Because I cannot hear you.
Is that the
Feedback.
superintendent?
No, it's Paul. That's me.
Oh,
No, it's not me.
Paul, very, very difficult to hear you.
All right. I just think about the operating costs.
Operating costs.
Is there a chat? He could put his question in the chat or comment in the chat.
We don't have chat on this.
Okay.
Maybe
Is this any better? Can I try this?
Yeah, I
Yes.
can hear you
There you
now.
go.
All
There you
right,
go.
there we go.
So I just had a question about operating costs. As we look at different increased initial costs, capital costs.
Okay.
Lost it again.
With humidification and some of these other options, is an increased operating cost? Should we look at that?
What I thought I heard was, is there a difference in operating costs between these different systems? There certainly is. The unit ventilator replacement, is just bringing in raw outside air, heating it with hot water and exhausting it through the roof. Both of the other options incorporate energy recovery. So, you would be saving approximately 30% on your fuel costs for heating if you went with those. There are other benefits to them. One is the addition of cooling. Obviously, adding cooling will then increase your operating cost. It just comes down to what's important. Cooling hasn't really been identified in these areas as something that's 100% necessary. But the energy recovery does provide about a 60% savings in outside air treatment costs, which usually translates to about 30% overall heating cost.
Yeah, Will, just from my perspective, I think cooling should be one of these options that you put in there. Obviously, this doesn't speak to COVID, but if we're retrofitting all of this equipment, you don't have to turn the cooling on, but if you needed it and wanted it to have it there, to me, that speaks more of a modern building than building something that does not have cooling.
Rick, can I make a comment? We're going to go too far with the options here. You're not going to get cooling out of a unit ventilator. The only way you're going to get cooling is to put rooftop units on the building, and then there are all kinds of other associated costs, which include ductwork and whatnot. That would have been the right thing to do back in 1959 or 1960 when this building was built. Somebody put unit ventilators in because it's probably the lowest cost method to provide heat and air circulation, and now we're stuck with it. I mean, obviously building codes have changed and whatnot. I think it's nice to talk about a million different options, but realistically, for the areas that have rooftop units, I think you have a little flexibility in what you can look at. For the areas that have unit ventilators, they bring in a percentage of outside air, they recirculate air that's already in the room. You can put a better filter in it, but that's about as far as you're going to go, to my knowledge, with a unit ventilator. So maybe there's a way to put UV protection in them. Humidification, you're not going to get out of them, and we already talked about the problems with humidification anyway. This place does not need to be designed like it's a pharmaceutical facility. We work in a lot of pharmaceutical facilities that have energy recovery, they have HEPA filtration, but these facilities are built so that the medications that you take and the shots that you receive, the injections, do not get contaminated. We don't need that in any of these structures. We do need adequate ventilation systems. I agree that we should be looking at better circulation where we can, but in the areas where we have unit ventilators, you're going to be pretty much stuck with that. Unless you want to retrofit these buildings to have supply and return ductwork, we're pretty well stuck with what we have. And like I said, in the areas where they have air handling units, we'll have a better chance of doing some other things that improve the breed. Aside from that, I think we're chasing things that aren't going to be realistically possible within the budget. That's just my opinion. I'd like to hear Will's response, if any.
Yeah, I agree. It's difficult to implement cooling with a unit ventilator system. The only way that you could really do it in this situation would be to provide an additional DX coil within the unit ventilator, and then you'd have a separate air-cooled condensing unit for each unit ventilator up on the roof. And that could provide cooling to the space. And it's something that
that's your typical like split system, Will?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, your other option is to put in a centralized chiller and repipe everything. But in this particular instance, there aren't that many units. It might not be too crazy to put in condensing units if that was a priority. The other nice thing about that is it would be fairly easy to do as an add alternate or to get an alternate price for it, because it doesn't really change the unit ventilator itself substantially other than the DX coil that's in it.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, we've got a project here in front of us where we're doing these changes. And basically, as somebody who might have somebody come in to do work for me, if I said I wanted AC and wanted to know what the cost with that was, if I had a contractor said, oh, well, your house was built a long time ago, I don't think I can really do it, I'm going to probably talk to another contractor. Okay. So I think at this point
Until
to
you
ask
get
the
a yes,
question,
yeah.
to ask the question and just see what it is, I don't need to perpetuate the mistake made in 1960, although I wouldn't call it a mistake then. It was just probably just what was normal
It's
then.
pretty
And
standard,
if we
yeah.
have a chance to change that for a modest increase, I mean, who am I to say what the tolerance is for changing an expense that goes along with this? So I think it's worth the exercise to ask the question, and then we can decide if it makes sense or not.
Louis, do you think it would make sense to try and price that up along with the COVID options that we've talked about?
You would need this, see, this is how I turn it around, Will. You would need to give us those designs
Yeah.
within weeks, because then we need to send it to be cost estimated.
Right. I can provide a pretty simple narrative that should be plenty for the cost estimator at a schematic level to break those things out into separate prices.
Then the answer is yes, we can include that as part of our investigations for DD.
Again, operational costs, going back to that, adding cooling is going to increase your operational cost. The other thing to consider is it's not just an HVAC thing. If you're going to add that much cooling, we've got to look at electrical power provisions to that. So they'll have to consider that as well, and we'll put that all in the narrative.
And just so we're clear, we're talking about every single building, not just Cumberland Hill and the transitional building, correct?
We're talking about just those two buildings, the transitional building and.
Well,
Cumberland.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
Louis, but it makes no sense to talk about two buildings when it's going to affect every single building down the road. We can't have
You're
this.
absolutely right.
We have to
You're
figure out all the
absolutely right.
expenses.
You're absolutely right. But what I said earlier was that these are kind of like our test projects to be able to determine what is the baseline mechanical cost, what does it cost to enhance them with the bipolar ionization, what does it cost to improve the filters, what does it cost to add air conditioning. I think from that study, we can typically apply that to all the buildings in the school.
We're also going to need some kind of an estimate of what the electricity cost in those buildings would be if we have air conditioning running.
Mark, but before we move on, you're okay with that? That's what we're doing. We're doing these two projects, and you can see and then we can apply that to the others. It's just that if you wanted us to do that to every building, sure, we could do it, but not in 2 weeks. There's no way we can do that in 2 weeks.
No, I understand that. One thing I think we should discuss is absolutely having air conditioning in every single nurse's office in every single building going forward. It's ridiculous. And I've been saying this for years. I know Alex is probably rolling his eyes. I've been saying this for years because it is ridiculous to have a sick child go into a nurse's office and that nurse's office is 95 degrees or even 100 degrees on a warm day.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would certainly be addressed in the systems that are required for COVID compliance to make sure that there is air conditioning in there.
Well, and without having to review the plans, if we could just jump for a second to Cumberland Hill and talk about, because this is another question that the committee had.
Yeah.
What systems do we have for the new additions?
Okay, so the new addition at Cumberland Hill is the middle row here, which is the energy recovery ventilator, which is a dedicated outside air system with overhead distribution. It does incorporate energy recovery. So as you exhaust the air from the building, there's a heat exchanger that traps that energy and uses that to temper the outside air that's coming in, either cool it or heat it, depending on what the outside situation is. So we have that, as well as baseboard radiation, hot water heat. So the ERV, it's it's a decoupled system. Basically, your heating is provided in a completely silent fashion by the baseboard heat, and the ventilation, strictly ventilation, comes in through the energy recovery unit.
So when we typically provide these systems, we tell school departments that it's going to feel like if they have a little bit of air conditioning because it gets rid of the humidity. Now,
Correct.
it is not air conditioning though.
Right. That's why we say it provides minimal baseline cooling, not full cooling. Basically, just the fresh air, which is about 20 to 25% of what you would actually need to provide full cooling, is going to be treated by a refrigeration circuit in the energy recovery ventilator, so that you're not bringing in hot, humid air. That does help to mitigate some of the issues that you would have on a hot day, but certainly not full cooling.
Okay, but I believe that what the committee is also asking us to do is to now design and investigate how much it would be to really add air conditioning to that system.
And we can do that. We've done that on a number of projects, Louis, where we just provide a small ductless split system within each classroom.
Yes.
Also very quiet, also decoupled from the energy recovery system, just to provide that cooling.
Okay, and so that's the new addition. In the existing building, as we discussed before, the existing unit ventilators are being refurbished under a different contract. Are we to go back to those unit ventilators and assess them for AC and the improvements that we talked about at the swing space? That's a question for the committee.
I think the answer is there is yes, Louis. This is like a one-shot opportunity, so let's see what improvements can be made and which ones make sense to make. I think Mark jumped in at one point, effectively thinking about sort of like equity, if you will, across all these buildings. And so to have a way to assess, what this change would mean throughout the program, even though we're only executing 2 buildings currently, I think that would be the question, and then we can make some good long-term decisions ahead of the detailed design moment.
I think, just my 2 cents on that, the retrofitting the existing unit ventilators with higher efficiency filters, I think that's a possibility. Incorporating disinfection, also a pretty simple thing to do in a retrofit application. The air conditioning, we wouldn't be able to add, a cooling coil into those existing unit ventilators.
But maybe we do that like we do in the energy recovery units, just add a split system in each classroom.
We can try that. It's a little awkward because you're actually going to have to run your unit ventilator to get your ventilation during the summertime, as well as the ductless split system.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the purposes of this study, we can do that.
Okay.
If that kind of covers the HVAC, I did have a question on the security vestibule that if we're done with the ventilation.
Okay. The security vestibule at which building?
So in the package, there was a separate sheet of security vestibule. I think it was part of the Mclaughlin package, but it seemed like a standalone document, almost like it was representative of typical, if you will. And my question was really simple. I couldn't read the height, like the resolution on the PDF was not sharp enough, so I couldn't read any of the numbers on
Okay.
there. But there's a microphone speaker element that's in the bulletproof glass for people to talk to, and I was just wondering about the height of that, and just suggesting we be careful about the disabilities, requirements for that particular type of device, that it's not too high off the floor. And it was just one of those things I just happened to notice.
Yes, good. Yeah, that's so good point. That's not one of the drawings that we have loaded up for the presentation. I don't know what it would take for Robert to be able to bring that up, but I can assure you that all of these security vestibules pass through are ADA compliant. One of the sign-offs that the Department of Ed requires us to get is from the Governor's Commission on Disability, but I will specifically address that issue at the next meeting.
Yeah, I just, just as long as somebody's checking it, I'm not the expert on that. It just seemed like, because I couldn't tell the heights, I couldn't tell if it was, 3 feet off the floor or 7. So. that's
Okay,
all.
we'll address that.
I certainly don't want to monopolize things here any more than I already have, but I did have a question on the roofing.
Okay, for the addition,
Yeah, I just somewhere in the packet I saw roofing specs, and it would called out a certain thickness of EPDM material, if I recall. And my comment was just pretty simple. I know that when we had done the addition, the town did the addition to the high school, the wellness center. There was issues relative to the roof leaking, and I just don't want a repeat of that. The roof leaked, the ventilation system. Ironically, there was something wrong with that. I just want to make sure that we're avoiding previous mistakes at wherever we can.
okay, thank you. We'll make sure of that. We typically, I believe, specified 80 mil fully adhered EPDM, and we have historically had very good luck with it.
Yeah, just put cannot leak in parentheses next to the spec, and we're good.
That's usually got to do with the installation procedures, Rick, rather than the material.
Yeah, I have no doubt, but it just jogged the memory, so I wanted to make mention of it.
Okay.
So someone bring me up to like where we are on the agenda. Because, obviously we've got under item 4, current projects, design review, A, B, and C. So I know that it's kind of an open-ended questioning. Where are we in reference to these votes to proceed with submission on any of those items? Are we at that point, or are we still finding our way there? Who can help me with that?
Are there any more questions on each of the schools? Because that would be, once the questions are done, then it would be easier to.
But I think the mayor is referring to the 3 mechanical options. I think that we have
I missed.
we have a clear direction of what we need to do. So I think that the committee would be able to vote on that now.
Yeah, no, Holly was correct. No, I'm at the actual, for people, this is generally what I do. I'm at the agenda item A, which would be, so there's 2 votes or possible votes to proceed on the agenda tonight under A and B, under 4, and then there's a Cumberland High School security project update. So I guess at this point in time, are there any questions about the schematic design review for the transitional building swing space? Is there any committee member that has a question with respect to that has not been answered? Okay, so it doesn't appear, so before we, so it would seem next that we would be looking to vote. Holly, I do have a question because, obviously cost as far as these mechanical options is a major factor, but, the governor, when, this whole initiative was safe, warm, and dry, right? I think it was safe, warm, and dry. And
Yeah.
safe was, as Rick Bolio said, I mean, safe at the time was more security. It was all security. There really wasn't any contaminant concerns or anything like that. And recognizing that RIDE doing its due diligence actually cut this project, right?
Right.
Is there any, any avenue politically to say, well, now that SAFE has changed, and you did, in your due diligence, you did reduce the total dollars of this project. Do you think there's any, any value in going to RIDE and saying, well, we can make enhancements to what was designed, but they will cost whatever that cost may be? And would you rethink the fact that you reduced us $4 million? Is that pie in the sky, or is that just?
It's a bit. I believe what they would. I spoke to Joe De Silva today. I called him about a few things, and he had said obviously that the HVAC systems will be scrutinized when they come in. So as long as they meet chips and they make sure, they follow the COVID guidelines, then that's fine. But of course, he would like to see as much as any district can afford, recognizing that with that being said, then what are you giving up? And that was my conversation with him. Like, what are you giving up? Because this is about 21st century learning. And I did mention security because so many millions have been spent in security across the state. And now people are opening windows. I've never seen an increase from an MOA. They let you shift money within it from building to building if you're, but you probably only do that once or twice over the 5 years based on what you're doing. He did tell me that they were voting tonight, actually, on coming up with grant money specifically for the HVAC in the schools. But so I asked him what was deciding that, the amount of that, because it was grant money, so it was free. And he said it was depending on how many COVID cases were in each community. And so maybe, a Providence or a Pawtucket where they have a higher rate. I don't know what the ratio is, but I asked him if I could call him in a day or two and find out if, because I think they're going to, it sounded pretty confident that there would be some free grant money. Obviously, the upgrades we're talking about this evening they're not going to give millions, but I think their directive would be prioritize. That's basically what the message was to me when I asked very much what you're asking me now, like how do you do what you're expecting in the HVAC and still do these projects? And he said, prioritize and maybe do some of the other stuff, not later, but figure it out. And I don't think he was talking about the full blown, A, B, or C here that we're looking at. I think he just meant overall, do better. And that's what they're looking for. And apparently there are lots of other districts everyone's going through the same thing. And a lot of these districts didn't just have, these major bonds approved. So someone like a district like Cumberland, when you're coming in, they're going to be looking because they know that you're doing the right thing by the schools. So, but
I think that, what we do have to keep in mind that with Cumberland, it's a more competitive atmosphere than it might be in some other communities that don't have other options. Let's put it that way. I mean, and I'm not going to speak to them, specifically, but, we do know that having parents decide to send their children to your school district as opposed to other options matters. And so any advantage that you can have, and I don't mean to say it like that, but any enhancement that you can do to make it safer and obviously, when it's safer, that allows you to provide in-person learning as opposed to not. And if your competitor can provide in-person learning and you can't, then you're at a competitive disadvantage. And so I do think it's a worthwhile venture for us to find out how much better we can make, understanding that we do have some, as Mr. Lindgren said, we have some things that have been designed a long time ago, but it is in our best interest to absolutely try to do. I think it's a big component today, and it's not going to end in another year or so, right? It's going to matter that your district took some initiative to not only just weather this storm, but be prepared for what might be another one, so, and you're definitely going to be second guessed if you don't do that. So I think it's important that we turn over that rock. So, okay, so on the agenda, we have a vote to proceed with a submission to RIDE for schematic design approval. Obviously, I'm not sure if someone wants to put a disclaimer on that, but obviously it's been clearly stated that this does not tie the committee's hands as far as enhancing any mechanical system. So that is still available to the committee, and a yes vote to proceed with item A does not put you in a risk that you will not have that option. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so pleasure of the committee, or does anyone want to make a motion?
I'd make the motion to approve. I guess we have to do these one at a time, but motion to approve, subject to getting, this extra bit of homework done, prior to making decisions about the detailed design.
I'll second.
All right, so can we have that motion? So the motion by Member Bolio is to approve, subject to, some sort of
HVAC review prior to detailed design phase approval. Is that basically concise enough, but clear enough?
It's good enough. I think it's good enough for me, but I'm not the.
So when you say design, so the DD stands for design documents.
Okay,
So
that's
prior
what I meant.
Yes, that's what I thought. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the motion is subject to HVAC review prior to
Design document
design documents
submission.
submission. And that was seconded by Mr. Lindgren. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Further discussion? Okay, so I'm supposed to do this by, well, if there's a nay, someone say nay, so I'll do so I won't have to do the roll call. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Those against? So I believe that's still 9-0. That passes. And next we have the Mclaughlin Cumberland Hill Elementary School. This is a similar vote. Is there any questions prior to me asking for a vote? Is there any further questions? Not seeing any. So this would be the same motion, subject to HVAC review prior to design document submission. Would anybody like to make?
I'll make the motion again.
Mr. Bolio makes the same motion.
I'll second again.
Seconded by Mr. Lindgren. Thank you. Further discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Those against? That passes 9-0 as well. And now we are at Cumberland High School Security Project update. Do we have an update,
Sure.
Holly?
Sure. It started about a week and a half ago, and the actual site work will take 2 months. So toward the end of November, the procurement is what will take longer for the other interior work. The interior construction will be in February, just because the lead time on the ballistic, everything, all the security pieces, everything has a very long lead time. The gates alone were ordered on, let's see, in the end of September, and they won't be in until the 5th of January. I mean, of February. So just to give you a sense of it. So all of the disruptive outside work will be done by the end of November. All the interior work will be done, through the end of the year a bit where they can, and then in February, and then the landscaping, of course, would be in April. But it has been moving. Fortunately, the weather's been cooperating, and we don't anticipate, we're watching the winter, but hopefully we'll have a milder winter like we have had in the past.
Are there any questions from the committee on the Cumberland High School security project update? No? Okay. So next, thank you, Holly. Next is public comment. Mike, do we have any members of the public on the call?
Well, it looks like it's all some sort of a member of the committee.
Okay, is there,
Yeah, no.
is there any, so I'll just ask, I guess because I should, is there anyone who would like to make a public comment under item 5 of tonight's agenda?
I don't see any hands up at this point.
So before asking for a motion to adjourn, we need to schedule the next meeting. And so I know we had some discussion the last time, but what's our thoughts on that? I know, is the Monday night a bad night, or we are still trying to stay in front of school committee meetings and give enough time for those to be, with at least 48 hours for proper notice to get on their docket. So
I thought basically non-school committee weeks, Tuesdays, kind of worked for everybody. Maybe I got that wrong. I know there was a schedule that had school committee weeks. This isn't it.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Mitchell.
I think and I don't have the list of school committee dates in front of me, but I believe there's only one in November because of Thanksgiving. But it's just for everyone's information, school committee meetings are generally both subcommittees and the open meeting are the second and fourth Tuesdays and Thursdays of the month. So I think if we tried to avoid second and fourth week, maybe the third, just and again, I not knowing when when the meeting in November is right off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me, but just for your consideration.
So so looking at the calendar, is it maybe Mr. Fiorillo can help us here. I mean, the first Thursday is the 12th. Is that more than likely going to be the only meeting that month? Or do you split it up and go somewhere? And I doubt you do that because you'd run into like potentially the council schedule. I think that's a Thursday, but is it that day? Do you know, Mark?
I don't know. I also know that we're going to have an organizational meeting after the election, depending on when the vote gets certified and all that. So,
okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Mr. Chairman, looking at the calendar in front of me, I'm assuming it's accurate. The fourth Thursday of November is Thanksgiving. So, if you wanted, we could do the week in between, the week of the 16th, just for your consideration.
It might be that week that we have the meeting. Let me see if I can jump over to the actual calendar.
Yes. So if typically it's first and third weeks, second and fourth weeks.
Right.
the third week would make sense. I mean, if we had to do something and have another follow-up meeting ahead of the next week's meeting, that would give us time to do that. You know, if we're not always doing it the same week of the meeting. So I think Tuesday's third week seems like it works. And if it happens to be just 2 days in front of the next meeting, I don't know if we're expecting to have to vote on anything in the next meeting.
I wouldn't think so.
Meeting
that-
is scheduled for the 19th.
Yes, so in, you know, the 17th would be the same week of, but in any other normal month, that's not the case, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the question is, do we believe that there's a likelihood that on the meeting, the November meeting, there would be something that would need to be approved at the school committee meeting? Do we know? Or, because we need to be cognizant of that. Is that a possibility?
It depends what happens over the next few weeks. I mean, what we're doing now in getting those numbers have nothing to do with that. If there's any invoices, perhaps, I don't know the process. That would be going forward, that would be something. So perhaps that might be, if it's a Tuesday with a school committee meeting on a Thursday, that
Yeah,
would
but
tie in
that's-
nicely.
But that's just for November.
And
Right,
it looks
but
like,
in-
sorry, I was just going to say, it looks like the public notice says that the meeting is November 19th and there is no Thursday meeting that month.
No second meeting that month. So
Correct.
we're going to have the school committee meeting on the 19th, and we'll probably have subcommittee meetings on the 17th.
Yep.
Okay, so that might put, so is the issue that may put some of the members at other meetings? Is that what the problem is? Or because it's not really an agenda problem, because the school committee on the 19th could agenda something that presupposes passage on the building committee on the 17th. And even if it doesn't happen, they would just pull it off their docket. So it's not a big deal. You know, but it's an issue if you have subcommittee meetings on the 17th and the superintendent and the assistant superintendent and Mr. Fiorillo and others are unavailable, and Mr. Prignano, well, then that could be an issue for us getting a quorum. So, right, is that the issue?
Can I just say though, I personally would like to get a date, a typical meeting time scheduled. And if 3 weeks from now, some subcommittee decides to meet on the 17th, we can always change the date. But I'd like to know that the third Tuesday of every single month is when we're meeting, and then take exception to that as needed. That would be my recommendation, having scheduled lots of meetings in the past.
Well, I'm just, I'm taking note of that, Rick, but I'm trying to make everybody happy, which usually means you make nobody. So if that's fine with everybody else, obviously I don't have anything else to do, so that would work for me. So if that's good for everybody else, we can give that a shot.
Other than that, I have no preference.
All right, so we're gonna shoot for November 17th, and if that doesn't work out, then there's always another day. Okay. So
I can just tell you though that the 17th we will have subcommittee meetings.
right, so you know, and if there's a vote and we don't get enough, we don't get a quorum. I mean, it's like, I think it's possible, but I mean, if we had everybody else, we'd probably still make it. But it's not a perfect solution, like I say. So, but for right now, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens on your side. The other thing is, what time are the subcommittee meetings? Generally,
Generally 5:30 and 6:30. So from 5:30 to 7:30, or even to 8 o'clock.
Is 5:30 fiscal, or is that which one is generally yours, Mark?
Generally, 5:30 to 6:30 is achievement, and then policy is 6:30 to 7:30, which you might push that to 8 o'clock because between the two meetings, they'll run late.
Right. So you might have to hop in and out of both of them, you know, in case we need you.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a suggestion? Perhaps we just take a vote if that's what we have to do or whatever on just the recurrence, typically being on a Tuesday, third week of the month. And then we can set the meeting at some other day for next month if we want to do that. I, for one, just would like the predictability of when they normally would occur. And the sooner we can get that nailed down, the better.
Yeah, I'm going to say that we're going to wait on that, Rick, for right now, because the problem that I see with that is that works for everybody on the building committee. But legislatively, when a council needs to approve something or a school committee needs to approve something, I need to have some wiggle room. And right now, I'm not comfortable that that's going to be available. But so
Okay.
I would just say, let's just stick to the 17th for this one. But at that point in time, yeah, I'm with you too. Let's zero in on one. But the last thing I want to do is say, yeah, it's going to be that one, and then find out, oh, that didn't make, we can't make the docket, or this, that, or the next thing. So it's just it's one of those things. I just want to make sure that we can hit all those prerequisites. So the next one's November 17th. Next, I need a motion to adjourn. Oh, Mr. Mitchell, did you have I know you had your hand up. Did I miss you, or?
No,
I have a
I'm good.
question.
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Holly has a question.
Yep.
Yes, please. I just want to reference the timing to get the documents to the committee prior to a meeting. Just a bit. I know typically in a perfect world, it would be a week, and that will be the goal. But as we get closer to the meeting, depending if we're sending things to the portal, to the Dropbox, we'll let everyone know. But just so the architects have time to actually do what you're asking them to do, to get it as close to the meeting and still give you plenty of time to be able to digest what's there would be helpful.
So Holly, are you looking for a no less than type of number?
Yeah, well, I know last time it was 2 weeks, and it would, that was a bit of a struggle. And as time goes, it obviously won't be big sets of plans, except a few times. But just for documents to be prepared, such as these documents that you were referring to earlier, right, with the pricing. So no less than so many days, and our goal will be a week. But just so we have a little bit of time to make sure you get what you need. That's.
I would say typically if it's 2 or 3 days, that's probably plenty. But I would
Right.
also say that if you have stuff early, push it up, notify everybody early, especially if we're looking at lots of documents.
Right.
But if it's just a single piece of paper, 2 or 3 days before is certainly plenty.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just my.
Okay, we good? Anything else?
Motion
All
to
right.
adjourn.
Mr.
Good night,
Fierro
everyone.
moves adjournment, seconded. I don't think you can't second that, Holly. Who's
I said good night.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Mitchell. There's no discussion on a motion to adjourn. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Those against? That passes 9-0, and we are adjourned at 7:38 p.m. by my watch.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much.
Good night, everybody.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Aye.